multiple offers and 100 people showing up to open houses. Are we really in that type of hot market again? Well, maybe in some select properties around the GTA. These are all things we talk about with our good friend and mortgage broker, Mr. Dion Beg, right after this. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite mortgage broker in all of the land, Mr. Dion Beg. How you doing, my man?
Great, man. How you doing?
Thumbs up. We're doing good. Wewe're doing good. We are.
Double,
Can you
double
believe
thumbs up
this?
because we had a Bank of Canada meeting last week, and it finally happened. The words we were all waiting to hear sounded like music to many first time buyers, mortgage holders, people who want to move, real estate industry experts and professionals. So we're finally getting a direction of a sense of relief.
That's right. That's right. And it's not the words we are lowering rates. We are just holding, and the lack of words. Maybe is that kind of where we're headed? We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. The
You
lack of
bet.
words.
Correct. It was
Yeah.
what was not said. And language is forever important when it comes to these Bank of Canada meetings, right? We've spoken about these words, dovish and hawkish. And we're finally back to a softer, more gentle, peaceful bird in what Tiff Macklem said last week.
Excellent. Excellent. And we're filming this on Monday, January 29th. We are almost at the end of the first month of the year. There's only 11 more months to go, my friends. It's as it always does, time tends to fly by. And I thought I'd do something interesting. I just want to look up the quick number of sales in the Durham region, Dion. And I was doing this as you jumped online here.
Okay, yeah,
And
sure.
and I was just kind of curious to see what's happening. And what we read online, and just what we want to do today
Mm,
is that necessarily the truth? There's a lot of people
right.
out there in, whether they're a realtor or mortgage broker or what have you, saying, here we go again. Multiple offers are showing up, markets are flying by. Well, Dion and I are going to kind of just talk about what's going on.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
sure.
is that an actual fact, or is
Yeah.
there pockets, or what's going on in our own businesses? And that will have a good, ear to the ground type of
Mm.
conversation, right?
Yeah, and I think I can't speak specifically as to why you chose Durham, but from my perspective, Durham's an interesting area because it's not the core of the 416. It's one of the first outliers in that what we would traditionally call the 905. But it's generally has bigger swings than say the downtown core. So it'd be interesting to see the numbers there.
Yeah, and I like looking at Durham or parts of York region, because Durham, of the big major areas around the GTA, is the lowest valued or the lowest price, comparing it to Peel or York region, or of course Toronto.
Mm.
Um, because it's a vast area, all the way down, by the lake, Whitby, Ajax, Oshawa, that type of thing, all the way up to Beaverton. So there's a big price gap, meaning
Yeah, right.
there's a lot of attainable homes in that area, should you choose to look in that area, and as far out as east as Bowmanville and the like. And just some quick numbers. I was looking at detached homes, and the number of detached homes that sold in November were 371.
Okay.
We say down, but December is always that month, because especially this year, we had really 2 weeks of vacation. 274 detached home sale. And as of this morning, January 29th, 300 detached homes have sold. And I
Okay.
expect, because it's a Monday and we just cut
Oh yeah,
off of a
the weekend.
weekend, we'll probably see some sales happen that get registered or updated on our system today and tomorrow.
Okay.
I did something else interesting. For our brokers team meeting last week, Dion, I pulled the number of showings that were happening in Newmarket. Different area, but that's okay.
Yep.
Go with me on this one. The number of showings from the previous weekend were almost double that than the previous weekend to that.
Oh, wow. And we already knew, as discussed earlier, that it's already been ramping up. A lot of realtors are saying, 50 people attending open houses as of 2 or 3 weeks ago. So if we're talking like 100 now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
it's and that's showings, that's booked showings. So that's a,
Mm.
an approved buyer coming to view your home, and these are some of the good things. And of course, a lot of buyers, as we all know, took we'll say a few months off or more, and just in the last couple of weeks, it would feel that they're coming back to the market to make a purchase in the early part of this year. I fielded more phone calls. Dion, talk to us about your business, just some from that perspective.
Yeah, so one of the early indicators in our business is just inquiry and applications sent to clients. And so what we're seeing is a lot more clients, some of whom we have worked with and put on hold for a long time, re-engaging, saying, Dion, let's get that rate hold updated again. So they're coming back out of the woodwork. We're getting more of our realtor referral partners calling us and sending clients our way than that was in the last quarter of last year. So our Januaries don't usually start this busy. That's the reality. And I think seasonality as it comes to the actual 4 seasons of nature are generally what our business runs on. But now we seem to be more seasonal as it relates to interest rates and interest rate announcements and expectations. And again, I think that's why people are back out in the mix, because they're feeling that this dark, cold winter season that hasn't just been one quarter of the year, but probably been for the last 2 full years as it comes to interest rates, we may be emerging into the spring of that season.
Yeah, yeah, and we are starting to see, and you will see some select little pockets, little areas where, yeah, we had, our open house had lineups and things like that. Well, that's not every open house, my
Mm.
friends. So let's
Yep.
not get caught up in the action. Uh, but on the same token, if you are looking at buying a home this year, or we'll call it the first quarter, the first couple of months of the year, make sure you're getting the right insight and the right information and in the right pathway to make that attainable. Um, I caution everyone by saying, don't get caught up in the hype, because that it's very selected hype. It's like a movie premiere that is only premiering in a couple of different small locations, right? With multiple offers and things like that. We are seeing the strategy of, if fair market value, we'll call it a million,
Hmm.
we are starting to see little pockets of the selling strategy. Well, let's list at 899 or something like that, or 950, I should say. And you just have that good heart to heart conversation with your buying realtor, and make sure that buying realtor understands the expectation from the sellers, just so everyone's in the right alignment. That's not
Yep.
happening everywhere, but I will say, um, and I think I mentioned this on our call last week. The little town, or the little area of Brooklyn, so just north of Whitby,
Yep.
there were, I believe, 6 homes listed under $1 million, and they all had an offer date. But that
Interesting.
that to me is just a little pocket, but it's good to watch to see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Good to watch
There's
to see
one
what
little
happens.
extra overlay on that magical $1 million number,
Mm,
which again I know Gary, but let me explain to the listeners. So CMHC mortgage insurance, or mortgage insurance in general, is only available for properties priced at less than $1 million. So if you happened to pay $1 million even for a property, you aren't able to put the minimum down payment, right? You're actually going to be forced to put 20% down. But if you happen to buy at 999, then that actually allows you to qualify for mortgage insurance. Now, when this rule came out a little while ago now, a couple of years ago now, I remember, and you probably remember, everything was listed at 999, right? And if people are offering at 999 or thereabouts, like they are in Brooklyn, my gut tells me that those are people who are prepared to potentially put 20% down if they're going into that type of negotiation. So I feel like, and this is true from what I have personally seen amongst my business over the last year in particular, the number of first-time home buyers who are approaching a purchase with the minimal down payment, that's greatly diminished over previous years. Most of these people are coming with 20% down, usually in the form of help from their family. And think about it. If you're a first-time home buyer buying a $1 million home, it means you got to have 200 grand in the bank. And most of us just haven't had enough working life to have been able to save 200 grand, right?
mm.
So these guys are generally getting help from family.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
that's a great point. Great point. Let's let's talk about what's going on and what was we mentioned this off the top, the interest rate announcements or lack thereof of some important verbiage.
Yes,
Let's kind of transition to that and talk to us about
sure.
what, where we came from, how did we get here,
Yes.
where we headed perhaps.
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll end up with where we are, but let's start from where it all began. And I got a couple of quick slides here. We won't spend too much time on them. So around the start of COVID started 2020 March, if everybody remembers. In July, the Bank of Canada came out and basically said, look, we've got inflation at pretty much zero right now. And the Bank of Canada rate was dropped to 0.25%. Okay. And the Bank of Canada basically came out and said, hey, Canadians, you're safe. Go and spend money. So I'll read this verbatim. Okay. And the Tiff Macklem came out and said, if you've got a mortgage or if you're considering making a major purchase or you're a business and you're considering making an investment, you can be confident rates will be low for a long time. Okay. So this was one of the biggest statements that we've heard from a central bank in a long time. And then, okay, so he's told Canadians to go out and spend and invest. And guess what they did, Gary? They went and they broke the piggy banks all around the nation. You could hear the piggy banks smashing, and everybody went crazy, right? And in fact, a lot of that money found its way into the real estate market as well as into the stock market, right? And we saw this meteoric rise in both of those asset classes. Now, and we've looked at this slide before, but just a reminder, what happened over here is this red line is inflation. And once those piggy banks got smashed, that red line shot to the moon. And remember, the Bank of Canada made that announcement of low rates in 2020, around about here, right? And remember that they made this promise to the Canadian people, hey, we're going to keep rates low for a long time. So even though around about here at this 3% mark, which was early 2021, that's when the Bank of Canada's own limits were breached, okay? That's when they really should have started to tap the brakes. They let it run, okay? And they let it run and run and run until it reached about here, okay, which is well over 5%, on its way to 6%. And then in around March 2022, they came out and said, okay, you know what? We're going to raise those interest rates. And they stepped them up and they stepped them up. And for the last 2 years, Canadians have been really feeling that pain. And happy to report, last year, we did actually cross the line where interest rates were in fact higher than inflation. The intended purpose of this monetary policy tightening has resulted in that. So that's where we are now. And last week, Tiff Macklem at their Bank of Canada meeting comes out and says, look, with inflation at 3.4%, with the Bank of Canada overnight rate at 5%, they've effectively come out and finally said no more increases. And so again, the language they use here is, and this is what Tiff Macklem said, Governing Council's discussions about future policy is shifting from whether monetary policy is restricted enough to how long to maintain the current restrictive stance. So it's not a matter of how much more should we go up, it's how long should we leave rates where they are before we start ticking down, right? So bit of a mouthful there, but that's kind of where we're at today. And in fact, Gary, you probably remember towards the end of last year, I went to Niagara to speak at a big conference. And there were hundreds of real estate agents in the room. And I said to them, I'm going to have my next webinar on January 30th. And that is actually tomorrow after the shooting of this. And the reason I picked that date was because I knew on January 24th, just a couple of days ago, the Bank of Canada was going to make an announcement, and it was highly likely that we were at another rate pause. What I didn't expect was them to use this type of language, right? For them to be this soft and dovish in their language, basically coming out and saying, hey, we are likely moving down, right? Without saying the words, they've said it. This is in the world of economics, they call this forward guidance. So you might hear this in the news and the media the next couple of days. The forward guidance, that is the language provided by the Bank of Canada, is such that they're telling the economy without telling the economy rates are coming down.
That's interesting. I like it. And we maybe it's common knowledge. I don't know. I had to remind myself just now. Most economists would suggest that a good rate of inflation is approximately 2%, whether you're in the United States or in Canada. And I'm curious, Dion, and I'm kind of throwing throwing this
Sure.
out there to see if there's a clear answer. Maybe there isn't. What what's a fair if inflation hovers at 2%, if I could say it,
Hmm.
what's a fair interest rate for the economy to accept? Is it 3.5, 4%? Is it 6%?
Sure.
What do you think?
So before I answer that question, just let me give you some context here. And this takes me back 20 years to Economics 101 in the Queensland University of Technology in the sunny state of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia.
It's
And
A, it sounds like
what
a
I learned,
terrible place. Hang on a second.
and what I learned in my one of my early lessons is that interest rates are one of the bluntest tools that a government or a central bank has in order to control the economy. And it's very blunt because it impacts every corner of the economy, right? So if you just want to slow the housing market, you can't just raise interest rates and expect it to only impact the housing market. It also impacts the small business owner, their ability to grow, their ability to employ people because they're not growing. And so banks have to be very careful, central banks have to be very careful about how they set monetary policy. Okay. Now, what is a good number? It's hard to say because it also depends on how these other dials of the economy are moving. What is going on with employment? What is going on with real GDP? Real GDP per capita is probably the one we should all be watching on, as discussed. It's not due to population growth. So the answer, Gary, I'm going to give you a politician's answer, which is it depends
It
on what
depends.
the other dials in the economy are doing. But again, I would say historically, if we look at, say, unemployment as another dial, we generally want that to hover somewhere around 5%. Anything more than that is, we're heading to recession. Anything less than that, we're probably going too high on the inflation side. And so it's a difficult task for anybody to pick. But I will say this: historically, prior to the 2008 global financial crisis, if you were to look at what was the interest rate in Canada, it was around 5 for the
Yeah.
previous 40 or so years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I recall that that's when we started buying investment properties. Our investment
Mhm.
properties had an interest rate of approximately 5%.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But
as
you get zero down and 40-year amortizations back then. I remember as well.
yeah. Yeah, different yeah,
Yeah.
things were you it allowed you to be incredibly creative,
Hmm.
right?
Correct.
And now you have to be creative in a different way,
Yeah.
right?
It's true.
There's the sandbox, and then how can you get it's like when you dump a box of Legos out,
Hmm.
everyone's going to build something a little bit differently, right? And I
I
think
like that analogy. Yeah.
right,
Yeah. Very
you
good.
gotta get creative on what you're going to be doing, especially over the next 12 months or so.
Hmm.
I as you were explaining that, it hit me too. We've gotten so out of whack, and we don't need to get into this because it's talked about over and over again. Is your debt ratio? How much of your monthly
Mm.
paycheck, as an example, is going to
Correct.
pay for housing and things like that? And
Yes.
historically, Dion, that's about 40%. Am I correct there? And
Ideally, yeah,
we're
40,
way out.
45,
We're way
some are a
off
bit more
that.
flexible, correct? But
Yeah.
yeah, 40. And so we're at a point now where nationwide, on average, the nation's at closer to 50%. And in the major centers like your Torontos and your Vancouvers, we're up around 70%, right? Which again, you look at that, and it just doesn't make sense. And again, how are people buying that? They're doing it with the help from family, right? With large cash down payments. And a lot of those transactions, Gary, and let's call it what it is, the higher end purchases are people moving up. So what they're doing is they're selling, they're taking equity. So they're moving from $1 million home to a $2 million home. It doesn't mean they're getting a $2 million mortgage,
No.
right? In many cases, they might be only getting a $1 million mortgage because of the equity in the first home. And so that's something that's kind of skewed when you look at those national numbers. But what I will say is this: it is exponentially harder for traditional first time home buyers to enter the market, right? So that's the challenging thing, and that's kind of the disheartening thing. The way that I'm an immigrant to Canada myself, And with a regular type income, I was able to buy a regular type house in the suburbs of the GTA. Today, I can't say the same to be true for other people in that same situation that I was in, 12 or so years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm likewise. We purchased our first home 20 years ago
Hmm.
for 100. I'm the guy that now gets to say this. We always used to laugh at this, but for 180,000 in Aurora, right? That's
Wow.
which
Okay.
is not
Now you got to
even,
add another couple of zeros.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if that's your down payment now in Aurora, right?
No,
But
you're not wrong. You're
anyways,
not wrong. Yeah.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
wouldn't be 20% down on a purchase in Aurora now. Yeah.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. Okay, as we wrap up here, give us that preview of what people are going to learn at your webinar on January 30th.
Yeah, so that's actually tomorrow night, and I know you're going to share this out there. But basically, guys, it's how to buy your first home, how to set up your kids, how to set up your retirement. Okay, these are the big questions that we've been helping people answer for the last, couple of decades in my business. And as you said, Gary, the way we build towards those things is different from the way we used to. And so there's new programs out there, there's new approaches out there to solve these same problems. But Gary, if I could just share one final slide,
Yeah, tell
which
me when you got it
is
ready.
what I want people just kind of to remember. As much as we have ups and downs and swings and roundabouts in real estate, what I want to share with everybody is this screen, okay, which is I just pulled this directly from the Toronto Real Estate Regional Real Estate Board, and this is their 45 plus year graph. I think this is as far back as they have kept records, right, for number for sales. And so if we go back 45 years, which is the year 1978, house prices were at around 67,000 on average. Okay, if 30 years ago in the year 1994, we're at 205,000. And over here today, we're at about 1.1 million. And again, the numbers here are, we went up 550% in 30 years, or over 1,600% over that 45-year number. And it's that we know this. It's not about timing the market. It's time in the market. That's one of the biggest cliches in the world of investing. But it's not a cliche if you're looking at the graph that I'm looking at, and there it is in black and white, or blue and white and orange and black. If what you're thinking about for your future, for your family, is trying to figure out how to get intergenerational wealth transferred and how to get your foot on that property ladder, then this is what this particular webinar will be discussing.
Excellent, my friends. Excellent. So if you're watching this and it's after January 30th and the information, you may have missed that webinar, don't worry. Dion, you can still reach out to Dion and remind us how that happens.
Yeah, so you can reach me at kangamortgage.ca or on Instagram at the Dion Beg.
There you have it, my friends. So for Dion Beg, I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next one. Bye for now.